Okay, so I'm Sofia and it's really good to be here. Thank you all for turning up. I woke up this morning feeling really nervous that no one was going to be here. And at 10 o'clock no one was here. Okay, so my mother's from Rotuma and she moved to Fiji probably in the early 50s. Rotuma is a very, very small island north of Fiji. We're Polynesian. We speak our own language. We speak Rotuman. But in 1881, we were ceded to the Queen, the British Empire at the time, and we became a colony of Britain. And Fiji, being the closest colonized land, they became our the administration for the British colony. So Rotuma was ceded to Fiji, to Britain in 1881, and then it became a big deal for Rotumans to travel to Fiji. So, you know, when the big thing in your life, the big aspirations in your life is to actually go from Rotuma to Fiji, to go on a 3-day journey on a boat, this cargo boat, and get to Fiji. And once you're there, it's like going from here to Paris, or from here to some European amazing country. So I was born in New Zealand. My mother travelled to Fiji and was a receptionist in a hotel. And my dad at the time was a young man of something like, I think he was about 32, which is actually not that young. And he left Scotland. He left Scotland on the night of the big train robbery that, I don't know if you know about this big amazing train robbery. That was the night that my father disappeared from Scotland, and he barely said goodbye to his family. He just hopped on this train, or hopped on this aeroplane, or this ship, and sailed all the way through the Pacific. He came to Australia, so I could have been half Aborigine or half something from Australia. I could have been Australian, but he went on his journey right through the Pacific. He came he actually came to Brisbane, and then he left here and went to Auckland. And became a farmhand in Auckland, and then he travelled all around New Zealand and ended up in Fiji. And the day that he arrived in Fiji, he booked into this hotel, and lo and behold, there was this beautiful dusky maiden behind the desk with her long hair and her, amazing Polynesian features, and they married within 2 weeks. So there's my parents. And after they married, my father decided to take her away from Fiji to live in New Zealand, because it's a place that he really liked. And I don't think my mother liked that place very much because it was really cold. So they moved to New Zealand and settled in Auckland. And I think it was really hard for my mum because there was no other Rotumans around for her to have contact with. And we come from a background of, we're very family oriented. So everything, we're very community oriented, and so she left this big, huge, extended family and went to a place where it was just her and her husband, who she'd only known for maybe a month at the time because they'd got married very, very quickly. And so she was very, very unhappy in New Zealand, but she travelled backwards and forwards a lot to see her family. She met up with these nuns when she was in Auckland, and that was her saving grace with the nuns. Being there, but she was actually a nun before she became a receptionist in a hotel and got married, so we have that in the closet, the family closet. So then she gave birth to myself, my brother, and took us home to show us off to her family. We went all the way to Rotuma, and my grandmother, who at the time had brought up a lot of my aunties and uncles' kids, and her grandkids that she was bringing up at the time had all grown up. And so when my brother and I turned up in Rotuma, she decided to keep us. And it's like a normal practice to actually have your aunties or your grandparents bring you up. So I was given to my grandmother and her husband at the time, and my mum left, said goodbye to us, and actually left and sailed off. And I remember I remember one of the times when I was about 4 years old when she came, and that's the last time I actually saw her until the mid-80s when I went back to New Zealand. And I remember waving to her, going off to the jetty and waving to her because she hopped on the boat and was going off. So that's one of my early memories of growing up. one of the best things about having had that happen to me was that I learned all the skills that I have now. So I learned to weave, and I learned to make necklaces. I learned to string shell necklaces that we picked up off the beach. And if you see footage of, old footage from the 70s of little kids, little island kids running along after an airplane or a truck, I was one of those kids. I was one of those kids that ran along after the truck and waved to whoever was on it, and now here I am, thanks to Maud. But everything that I do, I credit this woman. Her name was Sofia Tekela, and she taught me to actually never ever give up. She taught me to, when I had to make something, I had to make it really, really well. I don't think we're going to have time to actually do this. So I lived in Rotuma until I was a teenager. Then I left. I went to school. There, and at school we were punished for speaking Rotuman. So I learned to speak English in Rotuma. At the school, they had these rules where we weren't allowed to speak our own language, and so when we did that, because that's a natural thing to do, your spoken tongue, your first spoken tongue is what you naturally open your mouth and it comes out. Whenever I did that, they had this silver can, like empty can of Milo or something, and we had to carry it around our neck. Like it was made into like a necklace, and we actually had to carry this can, wear this can like a necklace, and walk around the school. And everyone else thought that that was like a real shame thing, but I thought it was great because it was a necklace. So I did that. We weren't allowed to speak English, and we weren't allowed to speak Rotuman. Had to speak English until school was over, and then as soon as we walked out the school grounds, we were able to go back into speaking Rotuman. But for that, I was really grateful because I can speak English and I can speak Rotuman, which is a big deal for me to go back home and be able to converse with my people in my own language. Because when my brother and I left, after my grandparents died, we left and went back to our parents, and I remember coming off the airport. It was the first time I'd ever worn shoes, and that was the big journey back home to New Zealand. And I remember after my grandmother died, it took 2 years for my father to actually get us ready, get us some passports to go back home. Because what had happened was when we left New Zealand to travel back to Fiji, we'd left on my mother's passport, and over the 13, 14 years that we were there, things had changed, and we were basically overstayers in Fiji, but there was no record of us having left New Zealand, so we were in limbo for quite a while, for 2 years. And in that 2 years, I remember sitting there and dreaming of being back in New Zealand, being with my parents, and it was just an amazing fantasy to actually sit there and on my auntie's porch at this other village that didn't belong to us because my grandmother had died, and we had to go and be looked after by some other adults, and watching the horizon, watching the sea, watching the clouds, and knowing that one day I was going to be home with my parents. And it happened 2 years later. So I got my first pair of shoes, and I hopped on the airplane for the first time. I'd barely even been in a truck or a car, or I'd never been in a car until I got to Fiji, and got my new dress, my new lava to take with me. And we went from Fiji we stayed in Fiji for 2 nights, and I remember not knowing how to turn the light switch on. So I remember walking into the auntie, it was dark, and one of the aunties said to me, go and turn the light on, and I had this amazing nervousness, and I didn't want to tell her that I actually didn't know what the light switch was, where it was, what I had to do with it. But someone pointed it out to me, and so like for me that's interesting in that I've gone from that to being able to hold a Dremel, hold the machines, the saws, the diamond saws that I use to actually cut this kind of thing. So I've kind of moved a long way from those humble beginnings. Okay, so I went to New Zealand. I took with me my language and my weaving skills and my plaiting skills, and I had a passion for making nice things to wear. And I started off actually making men's clothes. I think my first show was in 1993 at the Wellington Festival of Arts. It was called Tuwhatasi, and I had a show I had a section in that show of all these hibiscus flowered shirts and jackets, and that I had made, and the buttons were all shells, and the zips on them had, instead of a little zipper clasp thing, I actually made elaborate shell kind of pendant type things to actually hang off that. So that was my very, very, very first show. And then I found that what the passion for me was actually in the making of the actual pendants that went on the shirts rather than making the men's shirts. So I made this transition from that onto doing little necklaces to wear, and here I am. Okay, so that's a little background of where I am. My parents separated shortly after I actually went back to New Zealand, and so I didn't have much to do with my Rotuman family. We stayed with my father while my mother went off and did her own thing. So we stayed with him, and one of the things that happened when we first arrived was that my brother and I were speaking Rotuman to each other, but my mother had made this rule that when my father was present, that we weren't to speak our language in front of him, which I thought was really unusual, because he'd been with my mother for a long, long time, and long enough to have learnt the language and to at least have understood. And I think he only understood all the swear words, as you do when you're learning you were around people. So they separated, and then we stayed with my dad, and I had no contact whatsoever, because I was only really, really young, with my Rotuman family until 1997. Almost 15 years after I had left, I made this big journey back home to actually find them. And in the meantime, everyone had moved to Fiji from Rotuma. All the old people had actually died, so that we didn't really have any elders, so to speak, and it was just us, all the cousins. And they were really amazed that that I had been away to this amazing country, and I came back making jewellery, making stuff like they do for the festivals that they attend, for the functions that they attend. So when I came back, and I still remembered how to speak Rotuman, and I knew how to make this kind of thing, they were really proud of me, and I was really proud of myself for having done that. When I first hopped off the boat, I decided to sail back home because it was romantic, and it was what my mother did with us, I guess. She took me there for my first birthday, and we went through the ceremony called the mamasa, where when any traveller comes to Rotuma, there's this tradition where you have to be cleansed off your foreign germs. So it's like getting your feet washed, I guess. But there's a whole ceremony, whole tradition really associated with it, which is really, really amazing. And you get your hair oiled, and you get perfumed, and they do this amazing thing to you, and then they feed you, and that means that you're safe. That your whole journey and whole travels and the whole time in Rotuma will be a safe time for you, because it would be a shame if something happened to you if you hadn't had the mamasa. So that happened to me when I was probably just before I was turned 1, and then I decided to take my 2-year-old with me on this amazing journey. We went on this cargo ship back home, which I think was pretty much the same one that my mother had sailed us home in the first place. And we left in the afternoon, and it was beautiful until the midday the next day. We went into a cyclone, and it was the worst experience I ever had. It was this whole romantic notion of coming back home was just out the window. I was so sick that when they finally said Rotuma, and I hadn't seen it for 14 years, I think, I couldn't even get up off my seat to go and look at it. I was just so sick. So it wasn't very romantic after all. It's just all written, it's all written, and I read about it as a romantic thing, but it's really not that romantic when you have a bad experience like that. Okay, so I did that, then went back home, back to New Zealand, that I call home now, and started making lots and lots of work, started being asked to actually partake in exhibitions, and started getting my work out there. I come from a family of makers, or my grandmother made stuff. She was one of the most amazing weavers from the island, who wove a mat, a fine mat called the ape, which is a white mat. It's really, really fine. Her mother made things, her mother's mother made things. So I come from a woman of makers, and a matriarchal line of makers, and so it's really exciting to be able to carry on the tradition. I have a 7-year-old son now who is actually starting to make jewellery himself. Okay, so that's another little background thing. Okay, back to the artwork. Living in New Zealand has had a really major impact on my work. For one thing, the materials aren't readily available. And so what I do is I cast my eyes around the place, go to fantastic shops, look at all the industrial materials that are around, and so I'm using this kind of thing, waxed thread, instead of the traditional coconut sennet, pandanus. It's a product of being in New Zealand, the materials that I'm using now. There's still an element of the traditional stuff, using shells, and but in terms of the other materials I use, it's a very, very, it's from being in New Zealand and looking around, being, I think what the term is, the theoretical term is being the other's other, so I'm like a minority of a minority living in New Zealand. And so what I do is use this kind of thing. But I think it works really well with my work and I'm really excited about it. Okay, so matriarchal women making things. That's where I'm coming from. And the other thing is being a Pacific Islander living in New Zealand, being a Pacific Islander woman. You know, to think that I didn't have my first pair of shoes until I was 12. And to be part of an exhibition like this, I don't know how many years later, 20 years later, it's just an incredible journey for me. Yeah, but you can see all the Pacific, the lei-making aspect of the work. Has anyone ever travelled to the islands? No? Fiji, Rarotonga? First thing that happens when you get off the boat, if family or friends are greeting you, is they come up to you and they kiss you on your cheek and they put a lei around your head, and that welcomes you. And that, in a way, they cross over and they make your personal space becomes their personal space, and in putting a lei over your head, they touch your head, they touch your hair, which is a really sacred thing that you never ever do. So we have this, I mean, you'll see images of Pacific Islanders in those South Pacific type movies, where the women are swimming out towards the ship to greet the white sailors, and they all have flowers in their ear, they adorn themselves. So it's a tradition of people adorning themselves before they leave home to go to a party or to go to any form of gathering. If you didn't have time to make yourself a new necklace, if you didn't have time to make yourself something fabulous to wear, you just picked a leaf on your way out and you put it behind your ear, and that's you completely adorned and ready. It's like putting on a tie, or it's like putting on your pearls, and it's just a leaf from the garden or a flower from the garden. And so that's been an interesting thing that's actually coming through my work, is the whole adorning, the whole making something for a person that you don't really know. And I guess the interesting twist is that when my work gets sold, half the time I'm not there to place the work on that person's head, so I don't get that experience, and they don't get that experience with me, which is quite sad. But for those people that I gift the work to, that's an interesting thing for me, is the actual placing of the necklace over their heads, onto their shoulders. Yeah, so you can see elements of the flowers coming through my work, the adorning of your ears. This work was made, it was conceived while I was in Hawaii. My partner had a residency there, and I went there, went to the British Museum, went through all the markets, had a look at the Hawaiian tradition of lei-making, and just found that their use of their feather work is just incredible. The feather cloaks, the feather necklaces. Just looked at the colours that they use, like the red that has come through in my work. It's a very royal colour. For me, it's a very woman's colour. It's the colour of your mother and her mother and her mother. And in the old days, only royalty wore the red feathers, and so there's little elements like that which I picked up on, and they may not mean anything to anyone, but when you ask me about my work, that's where I'm coming from in terms of the use of colour. But aside from that, red's a very fabulous colour. The beading tradition, like I said before, when I was a little child, picking up shells off the beach, getting a nail and a stone and making a hole into it, and then threading, getting some leaf or some fibre that we've made from one of the bushes outside, and threading it through. That's where I'm coming from with that. That's just something that I've always had a passion for, and yeah.
Maud, thank you, Sophia. That's fantastic. Any questions?
Can I ask I know this one is made out of the paper from... I noticed one piece is made from paper from the Bible, the far one. Yeah. Was there any statement with that? Was the Christian influence on your family, or...?
The work that you're talking about belongs to actually Nikki Hastings McForge. She's
right.
another artist that's not here. When we were first colonised, basically where I'm coming from, from Rotuma, the island is divided into the Methodists and the Catholics, so religion has become a really, really major thing. What's happened, like the last war in Rotuma was a church, like a church war. It wasn't a land war, it wasn't a tribal war, it was a church war. It was a war where a lot of our warriors were killed, and they were killed for Christianity. They were killed because the two churches were fighting for ownership and for power in this very, very tiny, small island that's 18 square kilometres. There's 2,000 people that live there now, and there's 8 different churches. So we've embraced Christianity completely. I was in the festival in Samoa in 1996, and the Papua New Guinea people came, and when they did their traditional performance, somebody from the audience got up and started hitting them to get them off the stage because the women had no clothes on. So you can imagine we've gone from people that didn't wear clothes but were adorned very much, and from people that were very proud of our bodies to being covered up, to being made to have covered up. And the interesting thing is that now, you know, when I come to like a place like this, or when I go to Europe, the women walk around with barely any clothes on. I mean, you can see that. You can see the young kids walking around with. And then what's happened is that the islanders are now saying, "Oh, look at her, she's not covered up, how rude. What, you know, she's showing all her body, that's just not on." We've kind of taken that and internalized it, and it's now become our tradition. So that when I went back to Rotuma, I went and hopped on my cousin's bike, and he was taking me all around the island just to see my old friends. I had to cover my shoulders up. I wasn't allowed to wear a singlet. To go from my village to another village, I was allowed to wear a singlet in my auntie's home, but I wasn't allowed to do it another place. So you can see we've taken some of those elements of the coming of from white people to the islands and completely internalized, and it's become, we are the ones who are now saying to other people and to other Pacific Islanders, other people of colour, that that is not good enough that you're showing your body. So Nikki's work, this whole coming of Christ, I think it deals a lot with those Christian type issues, the church issues, you know, which has become something that's quite negative in a way.
Can I also ask the ritual that you had when you went, whether it's a sort of cleansing before you arrived, does that still continue?
It still continues today, and we allow only 100 visitors per year to our island because it's so little, I guess, and there's no hotels, there's nothing there like that. But everyone that comes gets hosted, and they get this. It's a tradition that you have to have this mamasa. It's a tradition that you have to have. If you don't have it, and something happens to you, something happens to somebody that if you don't perform the tradition onto the custom with people that have arrived, something bad will happen. We're very superstitious people. Even though we've embraced Christianity, it's become almost like a kind of imprisonment. There are still the old traditions coming through. We're still having the old ceremonies. One of my cousins who works for the church, she spends her whole time, every night there's prayers at the church, every night there's doing something for the church. She still massages, she still uses traditional leaves and to massage, and oils. There's a special ritual that she goes through. So in a way we're managing to embrace what's happening with people coming, with the coming of white people to our island, but we're still using those old traditions and still highly superstitious about those traditions. And so,
what sort of before Christianity came? Before Christianity came to the island, or the missionaries came. Did you? I'm sorry, we can't hear the question. Get closer. Is that better? Before Christianity and the missionaries came to the island, did you have any particular sort of formal form of worship? Did you worship nature or gods or what?
Tangaroa, the sea of the god of the seas.
God of the sea.
The god of the sea. We worshipped the trees, the sun. We worshipped nature. Yeah, we all had our old gods. The goddess. We had lots and lots of goddesses as well. I don't think very many people are worshipping them anymore. Yeah,
Sad.
When I make a series, like when I make a new series of work, the very first piece I always give away. And that, for me, it's a way of honouring the gods and the goddesses, honouring my ancestors before me, because everything that I make, I bring them into it. I bring them into it, so I have to give praise to their pride, to their dignity, to the skills that I have actually acquired from them, you know. Yeah.
When you talk about your life, it sounds as if everyone was very generous, sharing the making and all of that. But was it a hard life living on the island? Did people have to work very hard?
It is a very hard life, and when you read all the stories, when you think back, there's like a whole generation of New Zealand-born islanders that have no idea what it's like to live back home, and the hard work, the actual tilling of the land. If you don't earn dollars, you don't eat, unless you have somebody in your family that can work the land, and the land doesn't always give back to you. So even though I grew up in Rotuma and I'd lived there all that time, when I went back home, that whole period of being, it was like, that whole period of being in Rotuma, I had, of being in Fiji, and then, sorry, of living in Rotuma and then going to New Zealand, and that whole period of time where I had no contact with New Zealand, I had that whole idea as well. I had the idea that going back home was paradise. Back home was paradise for me, after having lived there and moved away. So it's a really hard place to live in. You know, it's not all bare-breasted women and hula skirts. It's not all about dancing every night, partying at the beach. It's about actually working the land and trying to make a living. When I was there, one of the things that really annoyed me was that we export copra, which is the byproduct of dried coconuts, for making soap to Fiji. And the men were spending a whole day cutting copra, cutting coconuts to send off to get dried, and they were getting 10 cents a kilo. And that 10 cents a kilo, they would have had to work all day for $10 or for $20, and that $20 will last them for the whole month until the next shipment comes and it needs to go off. Yeah, so it's a really, really hard life. And not only is it hard physically, it's hard mentally in terms of the things that are required of you, the protocols that you need to know all the time. You know, the woman sits, you have to sit, you have to remember all the time that you have to sit with your legs to the side, never crossed and never open apart. There's all sorts of things going on that makes it a really hard life if you don't know the protocol. But when you do learn it, you have to adhere to it all the time, because there's always going to be an elder there to put you in your place.
Can you tell us a little bit about the wonderful tattoo you have?
Oh yes. I read somewhere that Rotuman women have a really amazing tradition of tattoo, which no one has anymore. No one wears tattoo. No, women definitely don't wear tattoo. And when I first went back to Rotuma, I hid my tattoos. I wore long pants and I wore my sarong, my lava over it. And I covered my back for like 3 days until my auntie spied it. And because I was hiding it from her, I was terrified that when she found out, she was going to give me a thrashing like she did when I was really little. And she found out that I had this tattoo. She thought it was great because she told me that women from the old days had amazing tattoo. And we had the tattoo that was quite similar to the Samoan men's pe'a, that tattoo that they wear from their belly button all the way down to underneath their knees. Our Rotuman women actually had that. So I'm trying to learn more about it. And I actually really like the aesthetic of a tattoo. I like the branding of it. I first was tattooed when my daughter died, when she was 2. And it just seemed like the right thing to do, to scar my body, to let some blood go, let some blood flow. And it was like cleansing, it was a healing thing for me. But it's got to be that I really like tattoos, and they say that once you have your first one, you never stop. This was designed by an artist called John Pulley. He's one of an artist from New Zealand. He's also a writer. I use a lot of his poetry in my work. Like you'll see some of the Mother of Pearl has poetry engraved into it. And he did this for me, and he has a matching one on his forearm. But the lizard it's a very cunning kind of crawly animal, which I don't like very much, but it's a very territorial animal, and that's why he designed it for me. I think there's a legend where the lizard had done something really, really bad, and that's why you'll see it, it's always upside down. It bows its head in shame because of the trickery that it had performed at some stage. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much, Sophia.
Thank you.